This Wednesday, expect an exciting space mission. NASA's Artemis 2 set to launch from the Kennedy Space Center with the goal of eventually establishing a base on the moon. The 4 astronauts spearheading this week's mission will orbit around the moon's far side and back, covering nearly 500,000 miles in just 10 days. News Nation's Mills Hayes has the report tonight.
Natasha, the space race is on, and Artemis 2 is just one part of it. NASA will bring astronauts back to the moon for the first time in over 50 years with a permanent human presence on the moon, the ultimate goal. NASA officials Sunday saying,
"We are getting very, very close, and we are ready
to send 4 astronauts to the moon."
It's surreal. I almost want to say, though, I just feel relaxed. It's good to be here. We've trained for this, and we're ready to go.
Expected to take them further into space than any human has ever gone. The astronauts won't actually land on the moon, but will fly thousands of miles past the moon using its gravity to bend their path and slingshot them back to Earth. The whole trip will take about 10 days, and it's the first crewed mission aboard the Space Launch System rocket and the Orion spacecraft.
We have the opportunity to answer the question that could be the question of our lifetime, which is, are we alone? When we go out and meet people, people ask that all the time. Have you seen evidence of this? What can we learn? And the fact is that answering that question starts at the moon.
Astronaut Christina Koch saying the moon is a stepping stone to Mars, where evidence of past life may be. NASA announced plans to spend $20 billion over the next 7 years to build a moon base near the lunar South Pole, which would one day allow American astronauts to have a permanent presence there, potentially in the next 10 years.
It is our strong hope that this mission is the start of an era where every person on Earth can look at the moon and think of it as also a destination.
But first, NASA must land astronauts on the moon once again. And in a new age space race, it's something they're racing to beat China to.
We will return Americans to the moon before the end of President Trump's term. Our great competitor said before 2030. The difference between success and failure will be measured in months, not years. They may be early, and recent history suggests we might be late.
The Artemis 2 launch could happen as early as Wednesday evening, but it depends on the weather and any technical issues, and it has been delayed before. Natasha?
Mills Hayes with that tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our News Nation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.
Need some fuel for an epic gaming session?
Rollout at the Kennedy Space Center. Artemis, with NASA's most powerful rocket ever, the Space Launch System, or SLS, on a 12-hour, 4-mile rollout at the Kennedy Space Center. Artemis, with NASA's most powerful rocket ever, the Space Launch System, or SLS, on a 12-hour, 4-mile crawl to the launch pad, and a high-stakes, frenetic countdown blitz for yet another date with history. For the first time since Apollo 17 in 1972,
I was rolling on the moon one day.
4 astronauts are headed for a lunar rendezvous.
Victor, Christina, Jeremy, we're going to the moon.
And here we go.
November 16th, 2022.
7, 6, 5. 4-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
Roaring off Launch Pad 39B at the Kennedy Space Center.
And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
Roaring off Launch Pad 39B at the Kennedy Space Center, NASA's Artemis 1, an uncrewed test flight around the moon, and a high-resolution 80-mile-high flyover.
Now you are seeing the Earth, you are seeing home, you are seeing yourself in that image right there.
All to test a brand new rocket and a crew capsule named Orion.
This is the moment of truth for Orion.
After 25 days and 1.4 million miles, a fiery re-entry as Orion came screaming back to Earth at 32 times the speed of sound. then 300 miles south of San Diego.
Splashdown. The latest chapter of NASA's journey to the moon comes to a close. Orion, back on Earth.
A picture-perfect mission with NASA precision, setting the stage for humans.
There's a lot out there to explore, and this is the next beginning, and this is the Artemis generation.
Fast forward to 2026 and the dawn of a new era. Artemis 2, stacked and ready for launch, America's biggest lunar mission in 53 years. Artemis 2 is a 10-day mission slingshotting around the moon with 4 astronauts on board, testing all of the crew systems before Artemis 3 is set to land on the moon. Artemis 2 is Commander Reed Weissman, originally from Baltimore, a retired Navy captain fighter pilot and a single father of 2 after his wife Carol passed away. He spent 165 days on the space station in 2014 and served as the chief of the astronaut office. Pilot Victor Glover, a U.S. Navy pilot who served on the Crew 1 mission to the space station, where he also served as a flight engineer. Originally from California, he is married with 4 children. Mission specialist Christina Cook set a record for the longest single spaceflight by a woman with 328 days in space and participated in the first all-female spacewalk, growing up in Michigan and North Carolina. And astronaut Jeremy Hansen is a former fighter pilot and aquanaut. Originally from Ontario, he is married with 3 teenagers and proud to be the first Canadian headed to the moon.
The U.S. shines in space leadership, and they create this place where other countries like Canada can bring our genius and contribute in a meaningful way.
Artemis is the twin Greek god of Apollo with perfect aim. Flanked with 2 boosters, Artemis is 15% more powerful than the... Artemis is the twin Greek god of Apollo with perfect aim. Flanked with 2 boosters, Artemis is 15% more powerful than the monster Saturn V rockets that carried Apollo astronauts to the moon more than 50 years ago.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
And NASA is building heavily on the lessons learned from Apollo.
We are ready for every scenario as we ride this amazing space launch system in the Orion spacecraft. 250,000 miles away. It's going to be amazing.
On mission day 1, Artemis will blast off with 8.8 million pounds of thrust. In just 9 minutes, they'll be in Earth orbit.
And so once we get to space, the ascent portion really ends after about a half an orbit, when we're going to go from a 1,200-mile by 0-mile orbit to doing what we call a perigee-raise maneuver that gets us into a stable and sustainable orbit. And then we're going to get a couple of us out of our seats and start to check out really critical systems, the water system and the toilet.
After a series of Earth orbits, they'll head to the moon. On flight day 6, the Artemis 2 crew will fly closer to the moon than any astronaut since Apollo 17 landed there in 1972. For the first time, putting human eyes on a remote side of the moon.
We hope it's not the dark side. We hope it's the lit far side, because that could mean that we could see parts of the moon that never have had human eyes lay upon them before.
And then they'll keep going in a big Circle 8, traveling 4,600 miles beyond the moon before returning back to Earth. All 10 days spent inside their Orion crew capsule, about the size of a large minivan. The biggest difference between Orion and the Apollo crew capsule is, first of all, it's bigger, about 33% bigger. 4 astronauts will be inside Orion instead of 3 in Apollo, and Orion uses solar power rather than Apollo's battery power. For 3 years, all 4 have been training together in this very tight space. How do you prepare and practice for that, Christina? How do you literally sit elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder, no personal privacy, no private space, to prepare for this intensity?
I think a big part of preparing for being in a small space together is respect and practice. And we came up with some rules. Hey, headphones, that means pretend I'm not here. I have my headphones on, I'm taking a break. But also just we learned how to give each other grace and what that feels like, literally bumping into each other all the time.
Artemis is about reclaiming America's leadership in space.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
And setting the stage for a 21st century lunar landing.
Now today, the moon is calling us again.
Harrison Schmitt walked on the moon in that final Apollo 17 mission in 1972.
Cold War II has started, in my opinion.
But the 2026 space race is not with Russia, it's with China. Already, China has built a robotic base on the moon with plans to land its own astronauts there by 2030. Former commercial astronaut Jared Isaacman is NASA's new administrator.
Within the next 3 years, we are going to land American astronauts again on the moon, but this time with the infrastructure to stay.
And American politicians are determined not to let China get there first.
I'll be damned if the Chinese beat NASA or beat America back to the moon. We are going to win.
We have liftoff. Go Super Heavy. Go Starship.
To get there, NASA is depending on the Elon Musk SpaceX mega rocket called Starship. Standing nearly 400 feet tall, Starship is the biggest rocket ever built. Despite a perfect test flight in October 2025, Starship has suffered a series of high-profile setbacks after several test flights ended in explosions, with debris raining down over the Caribbean.
What in the world?
The SpaceX plan used Starship to lift resupply fuel tanks into Earth orbit, then fuel up before heading to the moon and rendezvousing with Orion, which will carry 4 astronauts from Earth. Once in lunar orbit, 2 astronauts will board Starship for a lunar landing, where they will live and work for more than 6 days. That's the plan, but a Starship lunar lander doesn't yet exist. And the clock is ticking down to the goal of a lunar landing in 2028. Concerned, NASA encouraged SpaceX rival Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin to also develop a lunar lander. Posting on X in 2025, Musk said, setbacks are part of testing and learning to eventually take humans beyond the moon to Mars. And NASA has also had to learn. The Artemis 1 launch was delayed for several months due to a hydrogen fuel leak and 2 hurricanes. But launch director Charlie Blackwell-Thompson says her team now has a much better understanding of the rocket.
Is there just some natural leaking that you've now come to realize is just, that's what the vehicle does?
There is some amount, and there is some amount of allowable. And so you want to manage within your allowable. And that's where we got to with Artemis, with that third launch countdown, is we learned how to manage within our allowable leak rate.
Engineers also discovered problems with the Orion crew capsule's heat shield. As Orion returned to Earth, the protective shield hit 5,000 degrees, half the temperature of the sun. To bleed off speed, NASA skipped the spaceship off the atmosphere before dipping back in. Engineers later discovered a charred layer of the heat shield where pieces had come off. NASA had to determine why, then come up with a fix for the Artemis 2 mission. Howard Hu is the Orion program manager.
Do you feel like you've solved the heat shield issue?
Definitely, we have. Like I said, we have found root cause, which is really important. We know what the heat shield's capable of and what we need to do to make the minor adjustments for the future vehicles.
The heat shield is all that stands between the astronauts and the extreme heat of the plasma on re-entry. The danger all too real for NASA. In 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia broke apart on re-entry after a piece of the heat shield was damaged and came off during liftoff, killing all. In 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia broke apart on re-entry after a piece of the heat shield was damaged and came off during liftoff, killing all 7 astronauts.
There are going to be real astronauts on board Orion 2. Does that raise the stakes for you guys?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're flying people here, and we've got to do the absolute best job we can.
Their lives depend on you.
They absolutely do. Us doing our job.
There will be a city on Mars in the year 2050. It will be humanity's second home, our first outpost away from the shelter of the Earth, and a construction project that will cement our future as a multi-planet species. SpaceX is determined to make this vision a reality, but it's going to require more than just ambition and big rockets to colonize Mars. The biggest thing that would set a Mars city apart from some other off-world colony like a moon base, for example, is this idea of being self-sustaining. You see, a person living on the moon could still return to the Earth as often as they like. There's only about 1 day of travel time between the two, and likewise, that would mean that any resources the people of the moon might require from Earth would be within easy reach at all times. Mars is a different story. Now we are looking at 8 months of travel time one way from Earth. This could be improved in the future with nuclear propulsion systems, but even if that works out as good as can be expected, the trip to Mars would still be around 45 days. That means the people of Mars cannot be dependent on the resources of Earth. They have to learn to harvest everything that the red planet has to offer, and what it has is really not much. But that will drive the creation of a massive industry on Mars to extract those resources and transform them into the necessities of human life. With the idea being that one day, the ships from Earth will just stop. Whatever the reason for that might be, support from our homeworld will come to an end and humanity will continue on from our second planet. This is going to require around 1 million people or more to be living and thriving in a Martian city before anything goes wrong on Earth. So that means we need to build deep roots on Mars, both figuratively and literally. First, there were robots. The planet Mars will be inhabited by dozens, maybe hundreds of robots before any person ever sets foot there. And when we do get there, we'll be following in the footsteps of this thing, Optimus, the Tesla bot. It's probably not a coincidence that a sister company of SpaceX is making the exact technology that they're going to need to start building on Mars. Optimus is a fully autonomous AI-powered humanoid, and it's designed to take over any job that is currently done by people. But on the flip side of that, Optimus could also begin doing a job that will eventually be taken over by a person, like a Mars colonist, for example. The thing about Mars is that it's just too far away and too inhospitable to simply launch a crew of human beings out onto the frontier and let them fend for themselves. It may have worked for the Europeans colonizing the New World, but the journey to Mars will be by far the most dangerous migration that humankind has ever experienced. The surface of Mars is colder than Antarctica, it's drier than the Sahara Desert, but with even bigger dust storms, and the atmosphere is so thin that liquid can't even exist. There's just not enough pressure to hold it together, so what you get is instant evaporation. People are mostly liquid, so outside of a pressure suit on Mars, you would instantly start to freeze, boil, and suffocate all at the same time. And even if you did stay safe inside your suit, you're still likely to get a heavy dose of radiation. The lack of atmosphere out there means that there's almost nothing separating the Martian surface from the colossal nuclear reactor in space that we call our sun. This is why SpaceX has already made their plan to launch the first ships to Mars with Optimus robots on board. Optimistically, this could happen as early as 2026. SpaceX has a roadmap that shows 5 Starship landers heading to Mars, each one loaded with 10 tons of payload. Now, the only real goal of that first transit will be to land at least one ship without crashing. That's why they want to send more than one at a time, because there will probably be a learning curve. One of the things we know about SpaceX is that they learn through trial and error, and oftentimes that means stuff blows up at first, but once they get it right, they're able to lock in and just keep executing very consistently. So, assuming that one ship lands safely and releases a handful of Optimus robots into the Martian landscape, they're still not going to have a whole lot to do until the next wave arrives. 2 years after the first successful landing is when the first real colonial fleet arrives. 20 Starship landers, each carrying 75 tons of cargo, most of which is going to be infrastructure for the first people to arrive. Now, let's talk about where this Mars colony is going to be located. SpaceX has already identified the Arcadia region as a prime candidate for settlement. This is just northeast of the volcano Olympus Mons, the tallest mountain in the entire solar system. Arcadia is a flat plain that's close to the equator, yet still believed to contain large deposits of water ice, which is going to be the single most important resource on Mars for a couple of reasons. When we talk about the infrastructure that the Optimus robots are going to be building for their future human comrades, there are two critical machines that they need to get up and running. One is a water treatment plant. People need to drink, but water is really heavy. Just bringing enough of it to keep everyone alive on the 8-month journey from Earth to Mars is going to be a challenge, and that already involves using a lot of recycled water. But there are only so many times that you can turn last night's pee into this morning's coffee. Now, the cool thing about water is that it can serve many purposes beyond just hydration. For example, you can break water apart into two base elements, oxygen and hydrogen. So as part of the same process that converts ice into drinkable water, our robot scouts can also produce oxygen for future colonists to breathe. Then there's hydrogen, not particularly useful for human consumption, but very important for making rocket fuel. Now here's something to consider in the long run. Signing up to be a Mars colonist is probably going to involve a one-way ticket to the Red Planet, but in the short term, before we have a big awesome city for everyone to live in, people are going to want a return trip. And just like with water, rocket fuel is very heavy. Just bringing enough of it to last the journey and land on Mars will be difficult, which means there won't be fuel left over to launch a second time and come all the way back to Earth. So a second big infrastructure project for the Optimus bots is going to be constructing a rocket fuel production plant. Now, there are some rockets that burn pure hydrogen as their fuel source, but it's not a popular choice because hydrogen is a very difficult element to work with. It's very prone to weird chemical reactions and is extremely hard to contain because it's the lightest element in the universe. That is why SpaceX chooses methane as their fuel for Starship. It's hydrogen with a little bit of carbon mixed in. 1 carbon atom for every 4 hydrogen atoms, and that carbon just helps to stabilize the mixture and weigh it down enough to make this whole process a lot easier. Now, we know hydrogen comes from water, but carbon will come out of thin air, literally. What little atmosphere Mars does have is mostly carbon dioxide, so a carbon capture device would be able to extract the necessary atoms from the air. You get carbon to make methane and some bonus oxygen for people to breathe. Now, in order to support the new robotic manufacturing industry on Mars, there's going to need to be a mining operation as well. The water ice that we are going to need is located under the ground. That means we need to dig it up. And again, probably not by coincidence, SpaceX is going to have access to some boring technology from another sister company. Now, a full-scale tunneling machine is not going to be practical for early construction on Mars, but taking that same design and scaling it down into a Martian mining rig is going to start unlocking those resources that make it possible for humans to survive and eventually create a sustainable colony. As a bonus, all of the soil and rock that they dig up while mining can be processed into a kind of asphalt and used to lay down hard surfaces for roads and landing pads. And that is where we end up about 2 years after our first large-scale robot landing. This could be as early as the year 2030. There's nothing wrong with a little optimism from time to time. And now it's time for the first people to arrive on Mars as part of this massive Starship fleet with 100 landers, each carrying 150 tons of cargo. There are going to be 2 new construction projects that need to begin once the first human settlers arrive. One is a power plant. Up until now, the robots have only needed enough electricity to recharge their batteries, something that could easily be handled by a few solar panels. But now that people are here, their energy needs are going to be much higher. So once the power plant is ready, all of the infrastructure that the robots have been building gets turned on. Life support systems that provide oxygen, water, heat, and air pressure need to run 24/7. The length of one...
Welcome to the Global News Podcast on YouTube. I'm Uncle Desai. On this episode, I'm joined by the BBC's technology editor, Zoe Kleinman. Zoe, there's been this huge landmark case in America. It's been described as the end of the era of impunity for social media companies. Please explain more.
So at the heart of this is the story of a 20-year-old woman who we know as Kaylee. We don't know her name. And she says that she discovered YouTube at the age of 6 and Instagram at the age of 9. And she spent an awful lot of time online. At some point, she was spending 16 hours a day on these platforms. And she suffered mental health problems. She suffered depression. She suffered body dysmorphia. She had suicidal thoughts. And she blames the companies for that. And in their defense, the tech company said she had a difficult childhood. She was already dealing with a lot of problems. And she went to social media to escape from these problems. But the jury has found in her favour and said that the platforms were engineered to keep her on them for as long as possible. And that she was coming across being shown content in that time that made her feel worse.
How much of a game-changing moment do you think this is in the tech world?
I think it's huge. I mean, anyone who doom scrolls will tell you that
I'm guilty of it.
You're guilty. There you go. You may even have said yourself that you find it addictive, right? But it has not been a term that the tech companies have used. And what they have been very careful to say over the years is that they're trying to give you a fun experience, but also a responsible one. And they're putting in all these tools and they have all this moderation and that, they're trying to give you a product that is good and that you like to spend time on because it's enjoyable. But this verdict changes that narrative because now a jury has come back and said, there are deliberate design practices built into these platforms to keep great people there, especially young people, and the tech companies have not done enough, even though they may say they have, to protect them. What I think is going to happen, not immediately, because there's going to be appeals, there's going to be further legal processes. Both companies, Google and Meta, say they don't agree with the verdict, but things are going to have to change. It's often called the Wild West. I've been doing this job for so long, and I've heard that so many times. The internet is a Wild West, and it still gets bandied about. And maybe this actually really is the moment when it stops being the Wild West. We've already been through a period, haven't we, where social media is under increasing scrutiny. We've seen it banned in Australia for under 16s. The UK is thinking about it. Other countries like Greece are also thinking about it. And this verdict just adds weight to that argument, doesn't it? That children shouldn't be there. And then what happens if the court says, right, you've got to take out all the features that keep people online. Now, what are they? You've got your auto-scrolling, you've got autoplay, you've got the algorithmic recommendations that are really on it, aren't they? They know exactly what it is that you want to see.
And they scroll for infinity as well. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. I once heard from TikTok that they tweak their algorithm every 8 videos that you see. So it's constantly updating to be absolutely sharply on what you want. And they would argue, well, it makes it a better experience for you, right? It's much more enjoyable if it's stuff you actually want to see. Right. But let's imagine that they have to take all of that out. Already you're looking at a very different social media experience, right? Which is arguably not as good, is it? It's not as enjoyable. It's not as engaging. That's the point. I'm really ancient, and I remember Friends Reunited, which, predates all of this. And everyone got so excited about it because it was a very basic platform where you could find your old school friends, all right? And everyone went, oh, fantastic. Oh, hi. I haven't seen you for years. How are you? Good. What are you doing? This, that, and the other. Right. That was it. There's nothing else to do.
MySpace then followed.
Yes,
suit
exactly.
After that, didn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you sort of ran out of things to do quite quickly. And if you take away all of those tactics, what are you left with? Maybe that would mean that it would die a natural death because people just wouldn't want to hang out there anymore.
When we hear the era of impunity is over, what does that mean? And what can that mean in terms of how the industry is operating in the future, in terms of the parameters, but maybe the concerns as well as to what might happen next?
So what that means is that the companies can no longer say that they are doing enough. They can no longer point to the big toolkits that they have in place, specifically for children. Many of them end up being parental responsibilities, don't they? And they can no longer say, here you are. Here's what we've done to keep your child safe. We've done our bit. Good luck. That's not going to work anymore. And the other thing I think is super interesting is all of these companies are based in the US, right? And in the US, there is a little clause of a law. It's called Section 230. And it shields the tech industry because what it says, essentially, this is very basically, don't come at me lawyers, what it says is the tech companies are not liable for the content that's published on them. Whereas, here we are sitting in a BBC studio. If I say something or you say something, the BBC is responsible for that. If we were sticking this on a social network, the social network that we chose would not be responsible for that content because it's protected by this law. And those in favour of this say, the industry couldn't survive without that protection because look at it. There are billions of people uploading billions of things in real time all around the world constantly. How do you manage that? You can't be responsible for that. But on the other hand, maybe it's time that they were made responsible for that. You would soon see the shutters come down, I think, if let's say YouTube or Instagram or TikTok, any of these networks had to be, fundamentally legally responsible for every bit of content that was there. And if that were to go, that would really change the way they did business.
And then with a lawsuit as significant as this, could we see then further lawsuits of a similar ilk, and what could be the repercussions? Could this be the beginning of a set of floodgates opening?
There are loads. This is only the second of a load of them that are going on throughout the rest of the year, all in the US. The first one was in New Mexico. Meta lost that one. The second one we've just heard, Meta's lost that one too. Now, that's not to say that it will lose all of them, but, it's not off to a very strong start in terms of its defence. There were actually 2 other companies that were supposed to be involved in this, and they were TikTok and Snap, which owns Snapchat, but they settled before the trial. So they have sort of absented themselves, if you like. I think it's been a shock for Meta and Google. I actually don't think they thought they would lose. They've really put a lot of resources, and they have a lot of resources, but they've put a lot of resources into fighting this. Eye-watering legal fees, what they thought was a strong defence. They say, we don't make any money out of children. Children use the site for free. We don't, because of regulation, not because they've chosen to, because of regulation, they're not exposed to the same advertising, they're not exposed to the same algorithms in places like the UK and Europe. So they are a bit more protected. And they say, we just think that they should be there. and they like it, and they bring trends and they bring a different content to the site that we want, because they want these people to grow up in their ecosystem.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. But when it comes to then, I guess, the onus on governments and in terms of regulation, you mentioned Australia there. Is it likely that other countries, other continents, we're going to start seeing changes now or bills implemented in order to protect young people especially?
So we've gone through a process here. When social media first kind of erupted and became a big thing, the companies wanted to self-regulate. They said, leave us alone. We know what we're doing. We are far more agile than you. We're dealing with this. We don't need government support. Well, that didn't go very well. And then they came to the government and said, regulate us. Tell us what you want us to do. We'll do it. But they don't like that either. There's a lot of lobbying that goes on, and there's a lot of there's a lot of deals that these companies want to do. They want to be regulated in a way fundamentally that's beneficial to them, right? Just like many other industries, and they kick against regulation that doesn't suit them. That said, they haven't left. So when Australia banned social media for under 16s, nobody's left. The social networks are still there for the over 16s, and it would take something quite dramatic, I think, for them to actually pull out. maybe they will. If it gets so strict that it gets to the point where they can't operate as a business anymore, maybe they will. We here in the UK are already kind of ahead of the curve with the Online Safety Act, aren't we? We have a lot of age verification now that's essential. So you have to prove how old you are to get onto social media sites, to get onto porn sites, to get onto lots of different sites, anything really that might have adult material on it. So we've already got that infrastructure in place here if we chose to activate it more widely.
When we hear that this could be the moment for big tech, which big tobacco companies had to deal with a couple of decades ago, could we see a future where the social media companies are having to self-regulate in order to avoid further lawsuits? Or how are they going to work now with governments or industry in order to make sure that there is a better change for the future for everybody involved?
I've heard a lot of people describing it as big tech's big tobacco moment. The tech companies hate that, by the way. And what does that mean? You know, does that mean we get health warnings on screens? Does it mean that they are limited from advertising or sponsoring stuff?
People still continue to smoke cigarettes, for example.
Exactly. It didn't stop people smoking, but it did change. You know, you can't have cigarettes sponsoring the Premier League anymore, right?
You know, it's sponsor, I think, big snooker events.
Exactly. And what does it mean for how people find these platforms going forward? We talk a lot about whether it's suitable for children under 16. Should it be under 18? Is this an adult-only experience? Are we going to look back on this time and think, you know, why on earth did we let our children on social media? Like we look back at other stuff that, you know, kids did in the past and think, what were we thinking? I don't know how we will judge this moment, but I do think that it will not be the same going forward. You know, if you have toddlers now, I don't think they will be on social media the way, let's say, 16, 17-year-olds are now.
That was Zoe Kleinman, our BBC technology editor. If you want to listen to more, do click on the link below where it says Global News Podcast. For now, thanks so much for your time.
This is the Utah desert, and it's just empty. Normally, nobody would bring anyone out to a place like this, but for years, they deliberately transported hundreds of beavers here, into a spot where they're not supposed to survive. In the US, people dug up old photos of the area and realized it used to be different. There was water here, rivers running full, and life was totally possible. Bringing it back with human hands would cost a fortune. Then this guy, no idea who he is, came up with a way to revive the place almost for free. That's why there are beavers in the desert now. But how are they supposed to fix it? Oh, it gets really interesting. Beavers are nature's engineers, sure, but nobody had ever thrown them a challenge like this, and their solution looks bizarre. A desert and a beaver are two things that shouldn't even appear in the same sentence. So what the hell is going on? To answer that question, we first need to figure out where Utah's water went in the first place. Take the drying Great Salt Lake as an example. Researchers estimate that the lake's inflow has dropped by 39% since 1850, simply because people have been diverting that water the whole time. And that's just one body of water. There's no shortage of culprits here: developers, cities, farmers, and so on. In short, Utah has almost no untouched natural water systems left. Rivers have severely degraded, their channels and floodplains are being reshaped more and more to fit human needs. And we often forget one simple thing. A river or stream isn't just water moving downhill, it's a living system which slowly builds its channel, slope, and banks, balancing the flow of water and sediment from the entire watershed. In other words, it does a ton of important work. Under normal conditions, a river spills onto its floodplain about once every 18 to 24 months. And the floodplain is part of the river too. It holds water, filters it, and helps regulate volume. Ponds and wetlands form there, plants take hold, animals move in. That's where biodiversity and all the other benefits come from. But once people interfere, the river turns into a straight, fast canal. The water shoots through, doesn't soak into the soil, doesn't build a floodplain, doesn't kickstart plant growth, and doesn't attract life. Just a flow of water, like a high-speed highway. That's it. The problem isn't limited to Utah. We'll get back to beavers soon, but first it's important to get the big picture straight. In this one state alone, more than 99% of the major rivers, including the Colorado and the Green, have already been altered from their natural state. And zooming out across the entire West, roughly half of all river systems have been damaged by human activity. That's about 140,000 miles of rivers in total. That's enough to wrap around the Earth almost 6 times. Snow is a whole story of its own in Utah. It's basically the state's signature. In winter, the snowpack works like a giant natural water bank. It melts gradually, replenishing streams and rivers, watering farmland, and topping up reservoirs. The problem is that the snowpack is shrinking. Since 1979, when Utah started monitoring it in a consistent way using snowtel stations, the peak snowpack has fallen by about 16%. Less snow equals less water in the rivers and creeks. After that, everything starts drying up. As water levels drop, ecosystems unravel, fish and wild animals take a hit, and biodiversity is threatened.